Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Indigenous Alliance Without Borders. Actually, welcome to our 24th anniversary. Every year at this time, we honor the world's Indigenous peoples and this day that's been proclaimed by the United Nations. And we're so fortunate that we have our esteemed knowledge keepers and elders here with us today to help us think about how to take action as Indigenous peoples. So hello to Indian country. I'm Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, and I am going to introduce you to our wonderful moderator, our Zoom facilitator, Q, who's from the Diné Nation, and she will be the person that keeps the flow of this meeting today. We just want to mention that Nana Teresa could not be with us today, and so we hope at another time that she can join us for another event. After the Q&A, we will show the debut of a video on a project we've been doing related to Indigenous language rights. It's called Embodying Indigenous Languages, and it's about our work with the Indigenous Language Office, our support of the Indigenous Language Office here. It's the only one in the country that provides support for the Indigenous migrants coming into our original territories through the border that has crossed our lands. And so it's a compelling story about the manual that the Indigenous Language Office has created to provide to various shelters and clinics so that the Indigenous migrants can get better healthcare through their own language. So thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it over to Q now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome this evening. Thank you for joining us. And we really hope that this evening provides not only information, but healing and different ways of how you connect to bring to fruition the efforts that you want to bring to your communities, to bring healing, to bring beauty, and so on and so forth. And who not better to do this with Dr. Wildcat and Mona. So right now, to begin off this evening's event, we would like to begin with the land acknowledgement. And with that, we need your participation on the other side of the screen. So get ready to enter into the chat. What lands do you reside on? What traditional territorial lands do you reside on? Is it Diné? Is it Hanatem? Is it Pascoyaki? San Carlos? So let's start seeing some of the lands that you all reside on in the chat. All right, let's see. Hanatem, Millie, nice to see we have you on there. Apologies for these pronunciations. Ahua, Huak, Atem, and Ueme on the ancestral lands of Kwa Nation. And if you feel that you need to, raise your hand and we'll have you unmuted if you'd like to properly pronounce these. San Carlos Apache. Thank you, Angel, for joining us tonight. The Tang Atem, Yo Eme, ancestral lands. Free the land, beautiful. Our land is very much important. And one of the things that we do have is one of those things is putting out your hand, shaking, acknowledging the other person across from you, whether it's through clanship, the band you identify, or the bands, or the village, or the villages that you identify with, and seeing how we all relate with one another. And how we relate is sharing our stories, sharing our experiences. And that is one thing we've gone through with our Mother Earth, is sharing the history that we've gone through with her. And all of that is embedded within our traditional oral stories. That is our science, that is our data, our Indigenous data there. All our beaters, our artists, you are all documenting data every day, whether it's beauty, whether it's some of the hardship, whether it's the seasons that we engrave on our planting sticks. So those, how do we stand in solidarity with our Mother Earth? Also, lands hunted and fished by the Osage. Welcome, everyone, welcome. Thank you. So go ahead and keep entering in where you're coming from and what traditional territory you are representing. And while we have those coming in, I'd like to hand it off to Sarah Sharouk, who will be providing us a blessing.
Welcome to WOW, Sarah Sharouk, Desert Awakenings, the Cree Nation. I'm humbled and honored to be here today with Tiwa. Tiwa, together everyone will awaken. I bring my four-legged with me today with the same gift as an Indigenous people, the gift of movement and freedom. As we start the Indigenous conference, I honor all those involved, all those that have taken the step forward to speak. I pray today to speak into our words and think into our thoughts and work in our deeds. May we be role models for all we come in contact with. And guide Mona Polacca and Dr. Wildcat with their bravery for speaking and coming forward, and all those that's backs we've walked on. I bring my grandmothers with me. My mother, my grandmother, Sarah Shank, my mother, Gladys Bender, my grandmother, Catherine Bender, for they taught me all that I have and all that I am. Teach love, that's what we are. So let us teach love through this conference, through the Alliance, and through the World Indigenous Day. May we speak our truth and remember, is it kind, is it true, and is it necessary? Natawinan gichigisagak kayan. Wichihinan ganawiman and nuts kagisagak. Ginanas kamtana kasaki iwan oche ikwak hitawatsawan. So we nan kakiyan Natawinan. Kiwi honek oche ihasim poya. Sataskatun. Nitagayo asan. Hi. Thank you for all that we are and all that we've become. I'm standing in the sacred labyrinth today with Tiwa. It's a butterfly, and as you know, the butterfly in the cocoon, if you take it out too soon, it becomes crippled. Just like the Indigenous people, we will come out stronger and wiser through all of this. Let us walk in love and teach love. Remember forgiveness. So that when we point fingers at other people, there's three pointing back at us. Let us remember the first thing, to be kind always. Thank you. We take a minute of silence here today to listen to the heartbeat of Mother Earth. Thank you, dear Creator, for bringing us here today to spread a message of love, acceptance, and change. I
Thank you, Sarah Sharuk, for providing that beautiful blessing for us. And as we all stand here in solidarity during our prayers, we also take time for ourselves. And that's a manner of self-care, self-healing. So thank you, Joshua and Shirley, for adding to the chat. We also have Wando and Ituan joining. And thank you, Shirley, for sharing the region near Kansas, Ka, and Rockosua rivers. She would like to honor the Dakota Delaware, the Lenape, Kansa Ka, Kiowa, or Kickapoo, Lakota, Osage, Saxon Fox, and Shawnee. Thank you all for joining us. So we'd like to first start off with our first presenter, Dr. Wildcat. Thank you, Dr. Daniel Wildcat, for joining us, who will be sharing alternative energy, carbon energy diet, what doesn't get talked about enough, how do we reduce the amount of energy we consume, better designed to minimize needs for external source, how communities can plan where they don't, culturally embedded climate change in K through 12, all aspects of our community. Following, we will have Mona. So let's bring to the floor Dr. Daniel Wildcat.
Sanlai. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and I'm just so honored to be a part of this program. I am speaking to you from less than probably a half a mile as a crow flies from the south bank of the Kansas River as it meanders across the northern edge of Lawrence, Kansas, and no more than two miles north as the crow flies of those beautiful Wakarusa wetlands that Shirley mentioned in her acknowledgement. The Haskell campus is very blessed to have on our south edge of our campus. Those wetlands are on our campus and a part of our campus, and a part that we cherish dearly. And so I'm really thankful to be on this land to honor the first Earth Guardians here, the Kaw people, the Osage, all of the people who had relationships with this place, and thankful for the gift of that water, that rivers, the wetlands, the water beneath the soil where I'm sitting in those alluvial soils of the Kansas River. So I think probably the way I'd like to start my remarks is just with that thought, that I think today one of the challenges we have as Indigenous people is that the dominant ideas of the colonizing forces of the world continue to talk about resources. They're always concerned with how we're going to manage resources. Whose right is it to use that resource? And I'm always reminded of something that Onondaga elder and Longhouse leader would always say, and that is, be careful about the words you use. He says, in our language, and I think it's the same for my own language, the Zoyaha, the Yuchi people, that's my people, we never had a word for resources. We lived in a world full of relatives. And I think we desperately need to be advocates today for speaking on behalf of all of our relatives who cannot speak in the manner in which we speak, but who have communicated with us, with our elders for generations, since time immemorial. If you pay attention and listen to what the plants, the animals, the wind, the air, the water will teach you. And so I'd like to say that I think that's one of the most important things we need to advance today. We need to advance this in our education programs. We need to advance this in our own native languages as we honor these other relatives. And we need to encourage this kind of shift from thinking that we live in a world full of resources. And my question is always, okay, so resources for whom? Oh, well, for us, of course, it's for humankind. Well, we now live, some earth scientists are saying, in a new geologic earth period called the Anthropocene. It's named after humans. It's the age of humans on this planet. And all I can say is it's kind of sad that that age thus far of humans is marked by a destruction of species, a death of species on the planet, a loss of biodiversity, a tremendous loss in natural habitats, a diminishment of air quality, of soil quality. And that's what the age of man represents so far. Now, the good news is, folks, and this is why I'm so honored to hear Mona talk. And Mona, if you have at any point you want to just jump in, feel free, because I know you can expand on some of this. But I think the good news is this. Our ancestors' ideas, worldviews are not responsible for the destruction we see around us today. Our traditions, our cultural traditions, our ceremonial traditions, our customary habits, the way we live, were such that, again, when you live in a world full of relatives, you quit thinking about whose right it is to use a resource, and you start framing your conduct in a worldview that says, I have to think about what my responsibilities are to the life around me. I think this is really, really, really critical, that we've got to draw on all of our indigenous relatives on this planet. We've got to come together and say, it's time for us to let the world know that it's a mistaken idea. It is a falsehood to think that we live in a world full of resources, but rather we must honor the fact we live in a world full of relatives. Think of how that would change people's conduct and their behavior. I don't think there's anything romantic about that. I call that indigenous realism. Let's get real, folks. This is the bottom line. This is what it's all about, those relationships we are engaged in. And so when you take that perspective, it opens up something else that, I mentioned, but I want to draw it out very explicitly. When people go to courts today, all they do is argue about whose right it is to use the water, whose right it is to have that land, whose right it is to use this or that. I think, again, let's draw on our own traditions of justice. And I think by doing so, we can leave aside as our primary mode of argumentation and defense and really advocacy for our relatives on this planet, a discussion of rights and try to counterbalance that with a discussion of responsibilities. We ought to be asking ourselves, what are the responsibilities we have to the land, to the air, to the water? Am I living in a responsible way? Some of you will recognize the name, the Cheyenne elder, Dr. Henrietta Mann. She was a visiting faculty member at our institution, Haskell Indian Nations University, where I've taught for the last 30 some years now. And I heard her tell her students one time, and I've always remembered this because I thought that's that kernel of wisdom, that those elders hold. It's simple, but it captures so much. She told our students, she said, as she used the term Indian, as Indian people, as indigenous people, she said, we don't really have, um, so much a problem with spirituality or that side of who we are, and in terms of our respect for the sacred power of this world. She says, that's not our problem. She says, we knew we were spirits before we came into this world. Our challenge now is to figure out how to be mature and competent human beings. I tell you what, if I leave my granddaughter and my grandson any gifts, I hope it's that gift to tell them, here's the important thing. Be a mature, be a responsible, be a competent human being. That means respecting your relatives and living as best you can respectfully with this life around us. So that would be my first two major points tonight. Let's take seriously what it would mean if all of the indigenous people of this world would come together and say, guess what? We are going to affirm the rights of our relatives of this other life on this planet. And we are going to affirm our responsibilities we have. We've got a great example of this in recent years. It was very fascinating, I think, that the water protectors, the women who led the water protectors at Standing Rock, made it very clear, don't call us protesters. We're not here to protest. We're here to protect that water, that sacred water, that life-giving force, that most maternal and ancient of all of our relatives, the water. And I thought that was how beautiful was that they were telling people, no, we're not here to protest. We're not here we are here to defend that water. And here's the hopeful part about that. I do want to say just a word about this. We all saw it, towards the end of Standing Rock, the indigenous people that set up the camps there were joined by maybe 2 or 3 times more non-native people who have a tribal ancestry, but they're very far removed from it. They've forgotten all about it, right? But they came to stand with people at Standing Rock. And that should be hopeful. That should tell us that, hey, there are a lot of people that are ready to listen to this. And so I want to start with just that general kind of framework, and then I'd like to suggest maybe a couple things about the current discussions now about climate change and how we're going to adapt to the changes that are underway, and some of the issues I think that are that really demand us to think deeply about how we are going to approach our life as the world is changing very much around us. The first one is, and Mona, I know we talked a little bit about this the other day, but you know, I, like you, get a little bit worried about some of the so-called alternative energies. So, you know, everyone wants to go, quote, green. And yet, you know, we start looking at aspects of, you know, what that means. And again, it draws on some of that technology, particularly if you're thinking about batteries to store solar power or wind power. Some of that, you know, calls on rare minerals, earth minerals that are pretty precious to be able to store those. Our whole, you know, uh, World Wide Web, this technology we're using tonight, you know, depends on you know, rare minerals to be able to do this, use this kind of technology. So, you know, that's kind of worrisome to me, a little bit worrisome that we do need to be mindful of that, you know. Um, so it occurred to me the other day that, you know, I don't think we should exclusively focus on finding newer, cheaper, greener energy sources. I think we need to take a lesson from our ancestors and learn how to live well without using so much human engineered energy. I think of what we could do in terms of housing and building design, how we could maybe draw on some of the lessons and the insights our ancestors had on how to live well in places that are get very warm, how to live well in places that get a lot of water and rain, how to live well in places that get very cold. Um, they built in those environments in sustainable ways, in a sustainable manner. And they didn't have generators, you know, and they didn't have, you know, electricity. But I think, I'm not saying that we're going to go back and live exactly the way they did. The world is changing, you know. That's the only constant we really have is change. And so I do think, though, that there are design insights and lessons we should apply. And my bottom line message here is I hope we can have a generation of designers, of builders, of people who are looking at how we live and say, can we design in a way that we use less energy, that we don't need to plug things in as much as we do? And I don't think that, again, is romanticism. I think that's going to require some deep thinking, some hard thinking, but I think we can draw on our own traditions to undertake that kind of research. So I wanted to make a big point of that, you know, there's so much talk now on, you know, new ways to generate energy and cheaper ways, greener ways to make energy. But maybe the problem is we've forgotten the most important power of this planet, and that is that power of the earth itself, and trying to figure out how to align our lives in a better way with that land, air, and water. So I think, you know, in terms of thinking about policy and things we ought to be advocating for with our tribal nations, I think this is very, very important. One final point I'd like to make is that I think right now things are changing right now, as we know. I mean, how many fires do we have now in the Intermountain West? I think we're over 100 major fires right now. And it's a tinderbox in much of the Intermountain West of the United States. Then you go on the east side, and some people are getting more water than they can possibly use. The planet is changing, and Mother Earth is telling us, hey, wake up, pay attention. I guess in terms of that, my hope is that all of us can prepare our children and our grandchildren and think those 7 generations into the future about some of the difficult challenges they're going to face. I think we need a full court press in elementary education, you know, even Head Start programs, tribal Head Start programs, to reintroduce our children to their languages, to their culture, and to the wisdom and knowledge of their ancestors, and get them to start realizing that, you know, there's that a quote that's very popular today. People who do all these public trainings, you know, they always have these real pithy quotes they give. And one I've heard, I don't know, dozens of times of it, and I'll use it now, but you've probably heard it before. And, you know, it's always attributed to Albert Einstein, although no one can find any evidence that Albert Einstein ever said it, but it sounds wise, right? So, oh, Albert Einstein said that. And it goes something like this: remember, you can't solve problems with the same kind of thinking that created them. That's the good news. Our Anishinaabe, our Tohono O'odham, our Dene, our Apache, our Coast Salish, our Passamaquoddy and Penobscot and Seminole and Cherokee and Cheyenne, and our ideas did not create the problems we are facing. But I really believe our children, with the proper education, could help solve some of those problems by drawing on our own tribal intellectual traditions, culture, and wisdom. And, you know, we do that with humility. It's not like we have all the answers. That's the other thing I always admire about, you know, speaking and listening, speaking with and listening to people much wiser than myself. And that's why I don't want to take too much time. I'd much rather listen to Mona than have me drone on much longer. But I think that one of the things that you learn is the gift of humility. That you know, that's really something that we would do well to encourage today. We seem to have a lot of very immature and overly proud old people in our society, and some of them are in positions of power. And I think, you know, we've got to really encourage people to take the challenges that we are facing very seriously, realize that we're not in it alone. We can help each other. Thank you so much for putting on this program today. I'm honored to be a part of it, but we need, you know, to be having convenings and comparing notes amongst ourselves, you know, and sharing knowledge and insights, because that is desperately needed today. And so, you know, in closing, and because I want to leave plenty of time for Mona, I'll just say this. As we think about what we can do, where we live, try to think about that notion. Somewhere in the introductions or something, I heard someone say something about kind of this notion of embodied culture. And I think that's the best thing we can do. Try to embody in your conduct, in the way you interact, and the way you work with people, that good spirit, that love, that respect. And I think that would go a long way today in the world. We need systemic change. There's no question about it. We've got some big system challenges we've got to do. But those of you who are familiar with my written work know that my primary point is, we can't even start to address the physical problems of climate change until we have a major series of cultural climate changes among the people on the planet. I think Indigenous voices are the most important voices in this century, because I think we have some knowledge and some wisdom that could help our Mother Earth and all of our life world relatives we share this planet with. And we do so humbly, not asking for anything, but, for people to listen and maybe try something different. And so with that, I'll close, say, San Lei, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share with you. And so I look forward to hearing Mona's comments now.
Thank you to my brother, Daniel Hyehet. Thank you so much. He is a professor at Haskell Indian Nations University, the director of Haskell Environmental Research Studies Center, an accomplished scholar who writes on Indigenous knowledge, technology, environment, and education. Thank you, Dr. Wildcat.
Online.
And going back to Keh and relating a number of what you had shared is within that is a way of life. As Indigenous peoples, it is not a religion. Every day it needs to be practiced, it needs to be embodied, and we need to be mindful of how we speak, how we think, how we act out on people, because our energy is very powerful, just as Mother Earth. She just has a different form of advocating and protecting as well. And with that, we have our cycle, our strategic way of planning, and that is to the east, thinking, to the west, planning, to the west, implementing, to the north, reflecting, and to our east, thinking about our community. How are we going to enhance innovation and problem solving of complex challenges? To the south of planning, what type of empowerment are we going to plan for others to learn? How are we going to break former barriers? And to the west of implementing, what type of educational and training opportunities, what type of engagement activities, collaboration, what type of listening is going to occur? And then when we go back into our north of reflection, what values aligned, what values sustain? And since time immemorial, it is our Indigenous knowledge systems that has maintained our living here. So thank you. So moving on, we'll go ahead and have Grandmother Mona, who will discuss human activity and climate impact, extractive industry, agriculture, and Indigenous impact and how they are responding. Ecocide law, rights of Mother Earth, rights of nature. The deeper impacts of climate change, spiritual and emotional impacts on Indigenous people from Amazon to Alaska, climate change refugees, geoengineer, and sunblocking. So let's welcome Grandmother Mona.
Where did you get all that information? I don't remember sending that, but first of all, I'd like to say commune to each and every one of you. And I'm very happy to join you. Thank you. And I'm honored to be able to share this time with you, Dr. Wildcat. I have high regard and respect for the work you do, and have one of your books I took with me one time. I went to Japan, and there was this young Japanese man that I showed it to him, and he was fascinated by it. So I gave it to him. So, I think that a lot of the points that you made are really important. And but first of all, I just want to introduce myself. I come from the Havasupai people, my mother's people, who are from the bottom of the Grand Canyon. The people of the blue-green water. We're the guardians of the Grand Canyon. And on my father's side, I'm from the Hopi and Tewa up in northern Arizona. The Polacca family is up there. And you know, one of the things that really has been my foundation of doing this work are certain things that I was told as I was growing up. And one of the things my mother told me when I became a young woman, and she took me out to greet the early morning dawn, and she told me, she said, you are whatever you do, you have a purpose. You have a purpose in life, and that whatever you do affects us. It affects your mother, your father, your sisters, your brothers, your extended family, relatives, your children and grandchildren, and the future generations, the ones that are yet to come, the ones we will not see. She told me that. And when she told me that, I took it to heart. It was like a seed was planted in me that I stand on that. And then I was also told by the elders that I grew up around Mojave, Chemehuevi, Hopi, and Navajo. That was my community. And so the other part of introducing ourselves is our water. What water do we come from? What water do we live by? And for me, I was born on the Colorado River in Parker, Arizona, the Colorado River Indian tribes. That's where I'm an enrolled member. But at the same time, my mother's and my bloodline on the Havasupai side is from that water that's within the Grand Canyon, again, the Colorado River. And then the other part of my upbringing is that, you know, when it comes to the water, I was told that whenever I come to the water, I have to introduce myself to it and to go to it respectfully and humbly, and to introduce myself to it before I take any of it, before I get into it, or even before I pray with it. And so these are some of the foundations of what you were talking about, Dr. Wildcat, you know, about, you know, the values that we have that are part of our Indigenous traditions. And when we talk about Indigenous people, we are the people who have continuously, from, we say, time immemorial, we have continuously inhabited the places where we can say our people first came into the world. We emerged into the world at these places, and we've never left them. Even if we've left to go live in different areas, we still have that connection to it. As my mother says, it's like your umbilical cord. You will always know you have home. You always know you can go back there. And so, you know, those are some of the things I was thinking about, some of the traditional teachings that go, you know, that we're always reminded of, and that's respect, humility, like you mentioned, Dr. Wildcat, to have, and to be honest, to have honesty, and to have courage. And that's, I believe that's where we are today. There was a time I was in Peru and I was having to walk. I mean, I was at Machu Picchu and I had to climb up those stairs, and they were really high. I could hardly even, take a step. But I got to the way I was told is that you walk 5 steps, you stop, and every step is a prayer. And I'm afraid of the height, but I'm also afraid I'm tired and I'm not sure if I can make it all the way to where I'm going. And I stood there and all of a sudden I heard a voice say to me, "What's the matter with you? You come from a long line of runners and walkers, hikers, how the Supai people have to hike into the Grand Canyon to get home or to get out. And it's like an 8-mile hike. Or if they hike from the South Rim, it's an even several day hike. And then the Hopi people are runners. And so this voice that reminded, you come from a long line of hikers and runners. What's the matter with you? It's in your blood. And I stopped. I had to laugh at myself. And I thank my ancestors for reminding me. And I got a new, burst of energy and continued all the way up almost to the top. But, those kind of things I think have been our foundation as Indigenous people. And as it is today, we all have teachers or elders in our communities that are always telling us that we have this place, we have a place in this web of life, and that it's important for us to participate in it. And so I wanted to, talk about, we're as you said, Dr. Wildcat, I put down here, we're fighting for our life. We're fighting for the life of our Mother Earth. And that the work we do should support human thriving and survival of Mother Earth. Our foundations of life, the water, the air, the fire, the earth, all these things that give us our life. And so, the way I was taught when I was younger, I mean, like around 14, 15 years old, and I first heard a Hopi elder who talked about, our sacred covenant, our sacred responsibilities and our sacred promise to the Creator for what we have, what we were given to live here in this world. And again, it was like that reminder, and it was, he said that when we came into the world, we were given instructions, the original instructions on how to live here and how to take care of it. And we were supposed, we people, the 4 brothers, red, yellow, black, and white, made that covenant, made that promise to take care of our home here. But Creator then told them that there would be those that will forget. There will be those that will continue to uphold the original instructions, but then there would be those who would forget. And that there would come a time when the ones who forgot would begin to destroy our home, our mother, the earth. And that those of us who have continued to practice and live by the original instructions, we would come forward and remind them about those original instructions. And so, and like you said, Dr. Wildcat, we as Indigenous people also have to remind ourselves, but I always say that it's in sharing the wisdom, the knowledge, the teachings, those instructions. It's in sharing it that we continue to have it. So, and you know, especially when we pass it on with the children and we show them, you know, my mother and other elders I've worked with have said, you know, tell me, they said, we had to observe. And the elders told me, they said, this is how you learn. You learn. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you think? How did you feel? Though you put all that together, and then you learn that way. It's the whole learning. And so so that's what I see happening. It makes me feel really good to see this happening. And we're being called to action. Our Mother Earth is calling us to action. Indigenous people have their lands are something like, I've seen it, something like 87% of the lands on Mother Earth and the biodiversity continues to exist on lands that Indigenous people still take care of. And so we have been carrying this on, and it's, again, it's almost like we are in this this place today where it really requires us to step forward, take a stand, like what happened at Standing Rock, like what's happening in many other places in the world right now, in Brazil and Colombia, these different places. And so it's so important for us to step forward, take a stand, and be a voice for the voiceless, as one of the the late grandmother Agnes Baker Pilgrim would say to us. We're the voice for the voiceless, the plant, animal, water, life, these other life forms that also have the right to exist. And so, you know, some of the impacts that have been happening, of course, you know, by human activity, of course, is what we're experiencing with climate change. And in that regard, the multinational corporations, agriculture, extractive industry are doing these land grabs of Indigenous lands and territories. But at the same time, the Indigenous people are stepping up and saying, wait a minute, that's unceded land, that's unceded territory. And I'm glad to see that there's been some cases where, like the Supreme Court of Canada has recognized the traditional laws of First Nation there. And so this is a real step forward. And we're also seeing where I'm seeing where a lot of the tribes have preserved. I know some tribes here in Arizona that have what they call preserves, or areas of land that are preserved with the indigenous plant life. They're protected, and they're off the the available lands list for any kind of production or development. And so, and in that way, they're able to they'll be able to continue to have the places where the animal life and the plant life that they have historically depended on for their their sustainability, their subsistence. And so that's another important thing. Also, a lot of them are looking at food sovereignty and how they take care of these traditional, foods sources. And this is, one of the areas when it comes to these situations involving the justice system. When we talk about, protecting, let's say, like for us down here, that I've been working on with Patricia and the Alianza, the Healing the Border project, where the area of the land that has been impacted by the border wall construction involved a sacred spring that was impacted. And this spring wasn't just there to look at. It was a source of water for all of the life that are around there. The animal life that came there to drink, the endangered turtle, mud turtle that lives in there, and the fish, all of the life that are there, they depend on that. And without any consideration that the water, that spring was being sucked dry because of the construction. And so, with climate change, we can't afford to allow things like that to happen, to kill these sources of water that aren't necessarily going to sustain agricultural operations. They can't, it didn't sustain the construction of the wall. And so when you talked about the change, I said there needs to be the paradigm shift, the complete reorganization, so to speak, of how society values these things they call resources, whereas we call them life. And so it's really really important that we come to the table to prepared with our our statement, our principles of how to have a balanced relationship with Mother Earth, with all of life that aren't human. And I always say it's time to be proactive rather than being reactive. We have to pay attention to, plans. Many of these the activities that are going on have been in the planning for probably 20 years. I know with government contracts to get what they call A&E, architectural and engineering plans, it takes 20 years to get it funded by the government. So that's an area that in regard to the policies, planning, and use of what they call the natural resources. So we need to have watchdog, sort of watchdogs or people that are paying attention to that. And I am so glad to see that our new Secretary of the Interior has really begun to address these issues. And when I thought about the impacts about what's happening with climate change, on the news you see what happens in the cities. You see the flooding that occurs in these urban areas. I don't think I've ever seen any report about what is happening in our tribal communities, you know, or areas where that possibly border our tribal communities. But there's a community up in Alaska called Newtok, and they are climate refugees because of the sea rise and the surge that occurs during the storms. And there's much land erosion that's occurring. So houses were dropping into the sea, into the ocean from that land erosion. So what has had to happen is they have had to be relocated. So again, you know, think about how would you feel when you've lived, your people, your ancestors have lived in a place from time immemorial, and you know everything about the lay of the land, everything, how to hunt there, where the hunting and fishing is good, all of those things that are their basic survival. Now they have had to, besides, you know, the ancestors, their relatives that may be buried there, and now they've had to relocate to another area. And what they did was they tried to find an area to move to that's further inland, but had similarity, as much as possible, similarities to the village that they were leaving. And I've had a friend who was involved in that process. And I told her, I said, I hope that you talk to these elders and document what they have to say about it, about how they feel. This is traumatic. This is very traumatic. At no choice of their own, they are being displaced. And so the Pacific Islanders, the Islanders, I believe the Marshall Islands are beginning, they're saying they're sinking because of the sea level rise. And there has to be some plan for relocating all of these people. So again, that's a huge impact on these indigenous people. I know this also occurred down in Louisiana. I can't remember the name of the tribe, but they too have been experiencing this issue because of the And then also, it's important to, to look at, okay, so what are some of the things that are happening to address it? I know right now a lot of the communities are focused on the pandemic and having to have a response plan, what they're doing. And so, climate change, also, there needs to be a response plan for that. And I'm not familiar with any climate change plans that any of the Indigenous people have as of yet. Many of them are beginning to talk about the changes that they see and how they say, we never experienced these things ever before. But they always all say, but we were told this was going to happen. That's what they say. We were told this pandemic was coming. That was what we were told. We were told this by the elders. We were told that there would come a time when we would see this great change in the weather patterns and how it was going to affect our lives. And all of them say it's because of the lack of caring for our home, Mother Earth. And so what has been occurring with in response, I suppose, and not necessarily just the climate change, but in the effort to bring forward the Indigenous voice and rights from our worldview. And one is the rights of Mother Earth. And that was where I met you, Dr. Wildcat, over at Haskell, when the Rights of Mother Earth conference was there.
Yes.
That was great.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. But the Rights of Mother Earth, that there was a document called the Cochabamba Accord that was drafted in Bolivia through the leadership of the former president Evo Morales. That document that was drafted by Indigenous people, and it was taken to the UN and delivered to the UN Secretary General. And so it's there. And like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, that took like 20 something years before it was, addressed and adopted. So we're hoping that it will rise to the top and, be recognized. But there's also what they call the rights of nature, and the rights of nature movement, which is basically focused pretty much on the work of the rights of Mother Earth. And what has happened is that the Maori people have, in 2017, they won their case to have rights of personhood established for their sacred Wanganui River. And that was a big success. I mean, that was a huge moment for all Indigenous people, because by doing that, they recognize that the Maori people have this relationship with this river, and that they have certain sacred responsibilities in taking care of it because it takes care of them. That reciprocity that we practice. and so they are involved in making any kind of decisions, proposals that are related to that river.
Hmm.
And as a result of that, there have been other rivers in other countries that have followed suit and have been given personhood. And then, and that's something that I'm also working on is here in Arizona, the Hopi have a sacred spring called Sipapupu. And it's a sacred spring that they use in their ceremonies. They depend on it. That area, that land up there, they don't have rivers, lakes, and streams.
Mhm.
They depend on the rain. They depend on their prayers for the rain. And then the sacred spring, the aquifer there, the Navajo aquifer. Well, when the Peabody mining company came in, they told the tribes that they were only going to take what would amount to a few cupfuls of water from that aquifer to use in their mining operation, to make slurry to shoot coal to the Navajo generating station. But in that agreement, they agreed to the clause that said if there were ever showed an impact on the spring, that they would stop mining. Hmm. And so over the years, the Hopi saw that their sacred spring, the level was dropping drastically. And so they invoked that clause. But it didn't, of course, the mining company didn't want to give up their water and honor what they had agreed to. So there were numerous, court battles. They won. The Hopi eventually won. The mine closed. But when it comes to making these agreements, this is what's happening right now. Is the Hopi have invoked their freedom of religion rights because that spring is their sacred ceremonial water. And so without it, they can't have that continue that their ceremonies of using that water. And so so what's happening right now is there's an international organization that is establishing what they call heritage and cultural shield. And it's sort of like what UNESCO did with World Heritage Sites. Mm-hmm. And so this one is specifically for water. Mm. And so that's something that is currently in the process. Well, actually, right now we're just in the introduction phase of bringing the organization to meet with the Hopi about this. So so these are things that are moving forward and have great potential of recognizing and allowing the Indigenous people to really uphold that sacred responsibility that means their life. And so so those are some of the things that are happening now with the with some of the movement and recognition of the Indigenous peoples' rights. And, you know, there's also what is being talked about, or there's a campaign that's starting, I believe it's in next month. It's an ecocide law campaign. And in their discussions, they acknowledge that this came from Indigenous people.
Hmm.
That valuing water and Mother Earth is what they have learned from Indigenous people. And so they've embraced it, and they're working on this ecocide law. They're taking it to the International World Court at The Hague. So it's you know, it's at that level right now. So those are some, you know, to me, it makes me feel good.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that the United Nations reports or documents that refer to the Indigenous people, they now refer to the Earth as Mother Earth.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I mean, even those kind of, you know, those kind of changes are, you know, really to me are important. And I acknowledge our elders, the ones that went there
Mhm.
to the UN in around 1993, I believe it was, when the first time the Indigenous people were allowed entry into the UN,
Mhm.
where they presented their concerns from their worldview and their original instructions. And so, you know, I want to acknowledge those elders and how they persevered. You know, they met a lot of challenges, but they still pursued this effort. And here today we have, you know, the International World's Indigenous Peoples Day.
Mhm.
And so I'm really, you know, I've been following these elders since I was a kid. You know, the group called the White Roots of Peace, the Chief Shenandoah and Thomas
Mhm.
Polacca, Philip Deere, all of those beautiful, wonderful leaders that
Mhm.
stood up for us
Yep.
at that level. And so I want to acknowledge them too, and acknowledge all of the ones that continue to do that work, the water protectors, and all of our traditional leaders.
Mhm.
And each one of the ones that are coming up, the youth that are taking a step,
Mhm.
waking, you know, that are stepping forward and having a voice.
Yeah.
And so I'm really grateful that I was able to share these thoughts with each one of you. And thank you for joining us. I appreciate every one of you. God bless you and wish all the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Grandmother Mona, for sharing your words, your experiences, and your journeys. And through it all is maintaining healthy relationships from beyond our five-fingered beings and all the way into our four states, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And that's what makes our Indigenous education so much different from Western Eurocentral education. is that one of the core things is we have to consider our state of emotion, as well as maintaining healthy state with our spirituality. And so that's practicing our prayers, practicing standing in solidarity with our Mother Earth, because we are in her womb in a manner. And whatever comes through the uterus, the barrier to protect us, but also as her babies, we have to create a healthy life within it so that our Mother Earth is also mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically healthy. So we have that reciprocity between relationships for future generations to flourish. Thank you, Grandmother Mona. And Grandmother Mona is co-secretariat of the Indigenous World Forum on Water and Peace. She's also a founding member of the International Council on 13 Indigenous Grandmothers, as well as senior fellow at Center for Earth Ethics, spiritual leader, and activist. Thank you all. So, as standing in solidarity with all our relations, I'd like to go back to the most previous comment by Dr. Patricia Gonzalez when we had asked, acknowledging our land. She would also like to share, honoring our landlords, who are the Wildcats, the Mountain Cats, the Desert Springs, Spider Grandmother, Gila Monster, the Mud Turtle. All these individuals are vital to our life cycle, our way of life. So thank you, Dr. Wildcat and Grandmother Mona. So right now, we're gonna go ahead into our Q&A, and I'd like to bring Tracy Hamilton so that she can ask a couple questions for our panelists.
Great.
You might have to help her unmute. I'm not sure if she can unmute herself.
I'm here.
All right.
I'm here. How is everybody? I'm really enjoying this conversation. Hi, Q. Good to see you. Beautiful as always. Well, I have more questions than my children do, but my kids have been listening in. We were at a basketball practice, and then and we've been listening in a little bit. And son, we were wondering if you have any thoughts or if you have any questions to Grandma Mona or Grandpa Wildcat about how we can take care of things.
He does not know anything about that.
Oh, he doesn't. They can hear you.
I don't care. She takes that back. I take that back. I don't know what to say.
You don't know what to. You don't have a question?
Yes, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say.
Well, we've been having these talks about, water protecting, and, what I've been teaching the kids is how, our water, it doesn't stop, it takes care of us and it doesn't stop. And so, I was taught as well that it's important that we introduce ourselves to the water, like Grandma Mona was saying. And so that's something that, that we know as Indian people, how these are not resources, they're our relatives, and so how I feel is, how can we as Indian people, Indigenous people, really put that out there, how can we continue to support those conversations in non-native communities.
It's a great question, Tracy. I'll take the first run at it, and then I know Mona will have something to say about this. But I believe the best thing is to do what you're doing with your children. Getting our children to understand how precious water is, and as the water protector said, water is life. is critical. And I think, you know, it goes from everything to how we use water, how we think of water. We don't waste water. You know, a lot of people today, are pretty wasteful with water. You know, they use it in ways that you're kind of going like, I see, people who, have their lawns time to have water going, every day, this particular time. We see, of course, those of you in the Phoenix area and Tucson know that, many neighborhoods are a pool in the backyard, every home, and of course, that's right between the golf courses that are spread out everywhere. And I think we really need to think, I'm not against golf. I'm not against people having a swimming pool. I think we need to really emphasize, that we need to think about how we're using water. And again, not thinking of it as some resource that we can buy or that we should fight to get more of, but really think the best way to respect it is to be modest in our use of water because it is so precious. And I think you're teaching your kids your children invaluable lessons by just conveying that idea. Water is life. We should do a whole curriculum in K through 12, just on that premise. What does it mean when we say water is life? And think of all the lessons that we could do to teach our children about that. So I think it begins in everywhere in terms of our own homes, how we use water, how we try to conserve water, how we might reuse water. If you have a system where you can have water reuse with brown water and that kind of thing. These are all things that, we should be talking about now and thinking about as people build and create new kinds of activities that may really put further pressure on that precious resource of water.
I think, well, right away I thought of a sort of like a saying, and it was that people won't realize the value of the water unless they have to go and get it and carry it. Then they can understand and realize that value and that what it means. When I was growing up, we always had a pail of water. We had a pail of water we drank from.
Yeah.
Because we didn't. I was living up in Grand Canyon, and so we didn't have the running water in the house. We had to go out and fill the bucket, bring the bucket, and we all had that. It was a responsibility, Yeah. And so those kind of teachings, are part of what builds that understanding. And I think one of the things that people, many people have expect in order for them to learn something that they have to have their little booklet with the directions in the book, but we all probably grew up being told, how to make fry bread, or how to make different things or take care of things, and how we bring in, you had a wood stove, you had to go out in the evening and before the sun went down, bring the wood in and have your, kindling and all that together. So in the morning, dad or mom could start the fire, but it was the children had the responsibility to bring that wood in. So there's those kind of teachings, I think, and for a large extent, are kind of not being practiced that much and need to be. And that's the same way with even adults who are asking you, what do I do? How can I do that? How do I bless the water? And things they want to know.
Yeah. Yep, I think that's a great point, that last point you made, Mona. I think, right now, it's really useful to get our children out of, get them used to paying attention to the world around them. And I think that's really, that teaches them a lot. They'll learn a lot if they just pay attention, learn to pay attention.
Thank you, Dr. Wildcat and Grandmother Mona. Tracy, did you have another question you'd like to ask?
I did, and I don't know, it escaped me.
How old are plants when they grow up totally?
How old are plants when they grow up totally? That's what Tonali was wondering. I think they're ancient.
We're talking about trees.
We're talking about water of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh gosh, my other question was about the accountability aspect, and the encouragement of using less. And I liked what Grandma Mona had said about carrying the water, because I remember when we were small, we had to go to the well to pump it. And sometimes that pump was really hot, because it'd be sitting in the sun, sometimes. And so we'd have to pump that water, and then we would have to carry it into the house too. And so I have those memories of how precious water is like that too. And, yes, I want to teach my children and instill that. But what stands out to me is I can't remember what my question was, but it's the spiritual aspects of water, as well as the high use of water. Can you speak to that about, I wonder if there's something that the water is trying to tell us, and in that spiritual way?
I'd like to say something about that. In I think all of our Indigenous ceremonies, we have the water. The water is present, and we pray and we talk to it. And we might call it our mother water, or we might call it our grandmother. But we talk to it as a relative. And we have, it's sort of like an unspoken understanding or belief that it hears us. It's going to, and even without us asking it, when we use it, we drink it, and it goes through us, and how it makes us feel, refreshed, feel good, your pores, your skin, everything feels like it's blooming like a flower or like a plant. And we don't question it, we accept it. And so I always say, some people need to have sort of like scientific, like the data. They need to have the scientific explanation or whatever. But I always tell them that if you want to see any research on it, I suggest you take a look at Dr. Emoto's work on the water messages from water. That work he did, and he did do work with the Hopi. They had put in a water system in one of the villages. And then they said, but what started happening, there was chaos, fighting, things going on that weren't good. And the leaders and the Chicmungwis, they said, what's going on here? What happened? What's making this happen? And then they thought about it and they said, oh, we never had a prayer for the water. So they had contacted Dr. Emoto and said that, they were doing this. So what they did was they took a sample of the water before the prayer, and they took a sample of water after the prayer. They sent the samples to Dr. Emoto. And in his method of analyzing it and looking at the crystals of the water, there was a huge difference in the crystal that came from the water before the prayer and the water after the prayer. Perfect and beautiful. The other one was all, all chaotic looking, not ugly looking, and so that so there's people who can probably look at that, and there's also other people who do that kind of work, but he's the only one that I've had contact with and know of through the Hopi work he did.
No, I think that's one of the, again, Indigenous people, we have such variety and diversity in how we express our unique identities. But there are those things that are sort of like those foundational features. It doesn't matter where you go in the world, Indigenous people understand. So you know how when you're going in the mountains and in the Western United States, we all know that if we get to a mountain place and we see those cloths tied on a shrub or a tree, maybe those tobacco bundles, we know, oh, this is a sacred place. This is a place where something, powerful has happened. And I just wanted to let you know, I did some work in Western Siberia with the Altai people back in 2000 and 2001. And I had a great, went there twice. The second time I went there was in the summer, and they took me to the mountains, me and my colleague, George Godfrey, and we had some Haskell students with us. And we were going along this road, and they said, oh, we want to stop and show you this site. And so that we pulled over, and I immediately saw these cloths that were tied in these shrubs and bushes around this spot. And I said, oh, this is a sacred site. They said, yes, this is a spring that all of the local native people use. They were marking that spring and letting people know this is sacred, this is powerful. By the way, I had a similar experience when I was in Japan. I got to visit Japan in a long time ago, about 1990, and the word for spirits in Japanese is kami, kami, and we were going up a mountain to a very sacred site. I think it was a Shinto shrine. And on the way to the top of this mountain, I started noticing there were all of these ties in the trees. And again, I just sort of immediately understood, okay, they're telling me this is a sacred place. And you know, so the fact that water gets honored that way, you know, around the world should tell us something about how precious that is.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. I appreciate that worldview. Thank you very much. Thank you, Grandma Mona. Thank you. Thank you, Grandpa Wildcat.
Thank you, Tracy, for your questions. And it's always healing also to hear little ones' voices in the background. One of our fuels that keeps our hearts and our passions going. And the accountability, how to grow it, is creating those memories of team working with relatives. And those are oral stories too as well. And it's beautiful passing those on. And it's beautiful hearing you're getting done with basketball practice and now your family is joining you here. You're already modeling it. Beautiful job. Keep it up. So going on to our next question posed by Millie. On the Navajo Nation, recently, community members were urged to conserve the amount of water they haul. Most who were asked to conserve don't have access to running water in their home. When there is a water shortage, who should be making concessions and how? How do Indigenous peoples address how cities and urban communities conserve water?
Yeah.
Great question. Great question. I'll give you my quick answer. One, I don't think the people who are hauling water are the problem. They already know the value of that water. They're hauling water because they need it for their household, for their family. I think the problem is, again, people living in the cities and stuff who are drawing down the Colorado River, who are drawing down the water tables. And again, we've got to ask ourselves for what? So they can wash their brand new car and make sure it's all shiny and doesn't have any dust on it. I'm just saying, I do think you're raising a very critical question. And I do think this is going to be part of what our tribal nations are going to be dealing with, right? We've got to really stand together, united, as water protectors. All of us do. Anyway, that's my short answer to a very complex problem. But in my mind, I don't think probably the people who have to haul the water are the problem, because I think they know how precious that water is, and I bet you they're not wasting it.
I had a comment, and you know, here in Arizona, there's 20 over 20 tribes here in the state of Arizona. There are what we call the river tribes. These are the tribes that live along the Colorado River. Most of the tribes have what they call their adjudicated water rights. They have their water rights. And if you looked at a pie representing the water, and you had it divided up, tribes have rights to about 3/4 of the pie, first rights. And the other users, the urban cities and all, agriculture, all those operations, they have the rest of it. Right now with the drought, with the water shortage, what is being asked. And you're right, Dr. Wildcat. Yeah, the tribes have to really, pay attention to this, because what's happening right now is they're having to look at the water usage, and the tribes are being asked to give up some of their water. So these large, high waste water users, they so they can have what they figure they need. And like you said, their swimming pools, their golf courses and all. So that's what we're facing here in Arizona. I always told the tribal leaders that that they are like oil emirates, and they can act like oil emirates with their water. That, and that this was also foretold that they would be asked to give up some of their water, or they said what they're being told is the water that you're not using, because the water that comes through the reservation, and they use so many acre feet of water, and then there's some water that continues to flow downstream. And of course, being the way we are, we think about the ones who are also downstream that need to have water, not just us, but there's others that are, in need of it as well. And there's tribes that are right there on the border along the Colorado River. So, so these are, this is what's happening right now. I agree with Dr. Wildcat. I don't think those tribal members that are hauling their own water should be expected to cut back. I'm sure they've established how much water they need, and they know the containers, their water tanks that they're filling, they know how long that's going to last them, and they know when they're going to have to be able to make arrangements to go get the water. So I agree with it.
Thank you. Moving to our next question. Cities around the world are having huge water problems, yet the governments don't seem to have solutions. How could we incorporate Indigenous knowledge to solve those water problems?
Well, so there are some really big questions that people are going to have to answer in this century. Okay. And so I probably won't see some of this activity, but the first one is, I think part of the water problem that cities face is sort of the scale at which they have built themselves up and where they have built. If you situate, millions of people within a mile of a coast, and then you heat the planet up in such a way that you're going to have sea level rise, some of the water problems cities are going to face on coastlines is very, very serious, because, what are they going to do if the sea level rises, as it very easily could, 6 inches, maybe a foot. This is going to be very, very dramatic. So that's kind of one side of it. Some cities are going to have more water than they ever wanted, and it's not going to be the kind they want. It's going to be salt water. So that's a problem. The other problem, I think, is, city use of fresh water, aquifers and water tables and the like. And I think, we're going to have to really, one of the things I would say is we're going to just have to really emphasize this kind of, as I said, it's a cultural change. It's a paradigm shift. We've got to get people to quit thinking that water is something that they just get when they turn on the tap. And that's how people think of it.
Mhm.
They only get concerned about water if they go turn on the tap and nothing comes out, and then they get worried.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think for cities, you know, they're going to have to think of some really creative ways for water reuse, water recycling. I mean, they're going to have to really take to heart this notion that maybe they need to inculcate this attitude that water is precious, water is life, and treat it as such, and quit thinking that it's just a resource. So I know we've talked about that, but I think ultimately that's kind of what it comes down to. You know, I mean, that I don't think it's going to be an easy technological fix. We want to solve everything with technology. Well, guess what? A
Mm.
lot of the technologies we've built have become part of the problem, right? And so that's something we have to be very wary of. But anyway, so I would say, you know, from both sides, some cities are going to have a lot more water than they ever wanted, and it's going to be seawater. Some cities are not going to have enough of, you know, clean drinking water that they need. And it's looking like we're headed towards some pretty serious, you know, decisions that are going to have to be made. And we'll find out, you know, are we really ready to behave like competent, mature human beings and listen to our mother? Because she's telling us everything we need to know now. Pay attention, and you better be careful with how you use our water. Right.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, you know, you just reminded me of something I meant to mention about technology.
Yeah.
And using that technology to supposedly address, you know, these concerns like climate change. And one of the things is geoengineering,
Yeah.
and where there is this project that is proposing to dim the sunlight, where they're proposing to fly these balloons that would be filled with some sort of particles or something, and explode them up there. Either, I'm not sure if it's in the atmosphere or outside the atmosphere, but the intention is that it would create this layer that would dim the sun
Mhm.
on the earth. And it's, I said, no way. But, you know, I mean, it's like, how can these people make these kind of decisions
Mhm.
about the whole world, our Mother Earth, thinking that by doing that, they are going to, you know, address climate change. And
Mhm.
what it does, just like we talked just about, is it's we're already out of balance.
Yeah.
And it creates a bigger imbalance if we don't pay attention to the universal laws of nature, the universal laws of Mother Earth.
Mhm.
And that's not going to be the answer.
Yeah.
Thank you for responding to that question. And no worries, Millie, that please do share your questions. We are here to share it on your behalf. If you have any questions, submit them to the chat or the Q&A box. So this next one is shared by Julian. It is a comment. Biga. Indigenous people here and around Mother Earth, especially women, understand the sacredness of water. The problem is big industry and the military and the American way of life, of wastefulness, of the gifts of Mother Earth. water, land spirits, now the fire spirits and the rain spirits have made the world realize where the real powers on Mother Earth are. Everything that is built by this genocidal colonist and capitalistic system is being burnt out, down, flooded out, and will be made useless. The Colorado River is at its driest in 1,350 years and no longer flows to the sea in Mexico. And she used to because of all the dams being built. And that can lead into our next question posed by Monica. We're losing many animals to extinction. Are there spiritual implications to this loss? What should we be doing and thinking about this?
It is one of the greatest losses. I mean, you know, the amount of species extinction that we're seeing on the planet, the loss of habitat that's threatening, you know, the incredible diversity of life on this planet. It is indeed has tremendous spiritual implications because, you know, the world is full of power. It's full of power. And that power, each of us has a little bit of that. And every life around us has a little bit of that. And so it's like when I think every time, you know, we lose an animal to extinction, every time we make it more difficult for an animal to survive because humans keep going in and destroying their homes, flooding their homelands, chopping down the forest canopy they live under. We're paying a price for that. And I do think it's not only just a physical price, I think it's a spiritual price in the sense that the world becomes, you know, we lose one more relationship that can produce tremendous power, you know. And I'm not talking about economic power. I'm not talking about political power. I'm talking about that power of life. That, you know, when we lose that, we, you know, we're a little less than what we were before. So I do think many people are very mindful of that today, and a lot of people are very attentive to the prayers, to the ceremonies that they are conducting now relative to all of those relatives that are threatened, and, you know, doing everything we can to make sure that they will not be lost.
Yeah, extinction is not only the animal life, but plants too.
Mhm.
Disappearing. And the thing is that, you know, everything has its purpose. And the existence, let's say like the bees,
Mhm.
the purpose, they're just this little tiny little insect that flies around and people don't want to get stung by them, but they have a very important part in the cycle of life
Mhm.
that we all enjoy.
Mhm.
Same thing with these all of the biodiversity
Mhm.
that they all have a purpose. And there are places where you go and that's the only place you will find that kind of fish or bird or, you know, that kind of an animal. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And that's a huge loss for the entire existence of everything that's connected to it. Just like, you know, it's that concept that we are all related. it's like this, this link, we're all connected. It's important for us to pay attention to that, what's happening.
Thank you. I love how in this discussion, we are already including our cultural knowledge and it's innate to us. So all of you on the other side of the screen, this is another way we are acting towards that. So thank you. Next question. What is the support needed from tribal government in areas of climate impact? How can communities respond to creating a plan and maintain the conversation on climate impact, especially through the current pandemic?
I think, you know, the role of governments of our tribal governments is critical. And I think that's why, you know, our participation with our tribal governments is crucial. But I think right now, a lot of tribes are starting now, as Mona had indicated, are starting to think about this issue of, you know, creating plans, doing that planning, thinking about what, you know, the future will mean. And I think that that is really something that everyone who's involved in this program today, you know, listening and things, you need to get engaged, get involved at the community level, and be raising these issues, because that's what it takes. I mean, there are a lot of day-to-day issues that people get tied up in, and sometimes, you know, things that don't seem to be an immediate crisis don't get any attention. And climate crisis is sort of like that. It moves very slow. Some places, when they experience it very dramatically, like the people who are facing the fires now in the West. But I think now's the time to really, at the community level within our nations, start letting the tribes, your tribal leaders, know what it is you would like to see done and what your needs are. Because like I say, there's no magic bullet now to answer this, but we need to all come together and really make sure that this discussion and the planning now happens. So my advice is, you know, bring this forward to your tribal governments, to your elected leadership, get involved at the community level, and in your own families, make sure everyone's mindful of how important this planning is going to be.
Yeah, I think it's really important for tribal governments to be at the table with the lawmakers, policymakers. And, you know, the tribes have, many of the tribes have environmental protection programs. And they have the ability to establish their environmental protection rules and regulations, not necessarily at the same level as the state or the federal government, but they can have a higher standard than what is established by these outside entities. The tribes can do that. And there are tribes who do have their environmental protection codes that are more restrictive in what they allow on their lands, in their waters, all those, everything in the environment of their community. So, you know, I think it's really important. The other thing is that there was a time when all of the tribes back in around 1978 or so, they were all developing what they called their tribal comprehensive land use plans. And during that time, what they did was they looked at their land base and kind of targeted certain areas for commercial agriculture, things like that. And and so I keep saying they need to take a look at that land use plan and revise it and update it and be prepared. That's part of the preparation, is knowing what you have. What do you have? Where are the areas? What is the flow of the landscape as far as, you know, the watershed? You know, if you're in a watershed, what is the, you know, how is that, and how would agriculture influence that? Because agriculture is a high contributor to water contamination. So yeah, I think it's really important to have for tribes to really be proactive in doing that.
Grandmother Mona, I love how you share knowing what you have. And that translated is having strong relations. And that's being familiar with our land, being able to observe behaviors, some of the effects, and how we can mitigate that. Just kind of like how we do our children. So thank you. We have one more question, if we have no others submitted right now. So, can Indigenous knowledges inform climate adaptation?
Right now, they're the most important knowledges on the planet. Now, I'm biased, I'm going to say that, but why do I say that? Because Indigenous people have in our traditions, we learned how to live well in places. Some of those places we've inhabited for hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, since time immemorial, as we often say. And I think right now that Indigenous knowledges, now I'm not talking about tribal secret, sacred knowledge that is ours, that we keep to ourselves, but I'm talking about those basic principles and values that we have about how to live well on this planet Earth in a particular place. So the Anishinaabe can tell you about how to live in those Great Lakes, you know, the Hopi and the Dene, how to live in the deserts, you know, Kiowa, Comanche, and the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, how to live on the Great Plains. And my ancestors, the southeastern United States, where, you know, those forests and rivers are in Georgia. But I think that right now, the knowledge we need is I would put it this way: Indigenous knowledges are the most important knowledges on the planet because, one, they're not anthropocentric. We recognize that the knowledge we have has been co-produced. Some of that knowledge has been given to us by the plants and the animals and the land, the air and the water, because we learned how to pay attention, to be mindful, and build those relationships. That's critical today. You know, we don't need people, as Mona indicated, who think they're going to take their technology and they're going to fix the earth. They're going to fix the atmosphere. There's nothing wrong with the earth. The problem is we've had some of humankind who've been behaving very, very badly and irresponsibly and disrespectfully. I think Indigenous voices, Indigenous knowledges are crucial. And I use the term indigenuity. We need to apply our ancient wisdom today to solve very contemporary problems that we're facing. I want my granddaughter to know how to use Indigenous knowledge to solve very contemporary problems. But I think Indigenous people are the key, and their knowledge right now. I'm not talking about tribal sacred knowledge. I'm talking about that very practical knowledge of understanding the importance of respect for the land, the air and the water, the plants and the animals, and knowing something about them in that place you call home. All of humankind needs to develop that kind of awareness and mindfulness now. And the best teachers are Indigenous people.
Mhm. Absolutely. I totally agree with what you're saying, Dr. Wildcat. And I think that that's beginning to happen.
Yep.
It's beginning to happen, and I think one of the things that I've learned is that sometimes we are our what do you call it, biggest critic or
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's like, okay, so there's this thing sometimes happens is that somebody says to you, well, who gave you the authority to
Yeah.
you know, to speak?
Yeah.
And many times it's us women who are, you know, confronted with that. You shouldn't be the one to be speaking. It should be, you know, I know somebody who should be speaking. And, you know, and usually what my response is that I say, that's really good, you know, people like that, and they're important. It's important to have them at the table
Mhm.
and have their voice, their message heard. But you asked me who gave me the authority. My grandma, my mother, my children, my grandchildren, my great grandchildren, and the future generations that I won't see. They give me the authority. I speak for them. And so I'm not an elected official or leader. I mean, I have been before, but
No.
over probably the past maybe 20 years or so that I've been
Mhm.
doing a lot of this work with Indigenous people globally, I'm not given any kind of official governmental or you know, a tribal leader status, any of that. But like my mother told me, she said, you know, you speak, you have to speak for your people. You have to speak up and take care of them, and you have to help them. That's what she told me.
Mhm.
Help them.
Yeah.
The night she was going to go, I had the dream. She told me this when I turned 14. She told me this again before she left this world.
Mhm.
And she said, she was showing me, we were flying, showing me. And she said, help the people, help the people. They need your help. You know what to do, you know what to say. Help the people, help the people, help the people. And I said, okay, Mom, I'll help the people. And I woke up. And you know, that's my, you know, that's the authority I stand on, you know. And, it's sort of like a story about Buddha. When someone asked Buddha, you know, a question like that,
Mhm.
gave you that authority. And
Yeah.
he said, ask my mother. And he pointed at the earth. So, you know, I encourage people, our people, Indigenous people, to be a voice.
Yeah.
Those I guess those days of you know, being reserved and sitting back and allowing others to make decisions about our people, our homelands,
Mhm.
they're gone. We have to.
Yeah.
We have to.
Beautiful job, everyone. We always appreciate your words, your good medicine. And one other way that holistically we can move towards this, our language, advocating the
Absolutely.
language, our prayers, our other relations understand our languages. And who can challenge our language when it's written into policy, when we define what our language means, what those policy means, those universal laws. And it does not carry a Western Eurocentric definition, but it carries our own universal laws, our own ways of knowing and solution building.
Mhm.
Thank you. So that closes us up for our Q&A. And while we're wrapping this up, I'd like to announce Monday, August 9th is International Days of World's Indigenous Peoples. So we will replay this Zoom webinar recording on Monday. So to join or view this recording, it will be posted on the Alianza Facebook page. So feel free to visit our Facebook page and click on the link and hear us again. So before we go to our closing prayer, I just kind of like to share a little bit more to strengthen our relation with Sarah, who provided our opening prayer. Sarah Sharuk has made her life one of service. In finding her native Cree roots, she found tools to live her best life and shares these concepts with others to live a higher life of living and loving. She has a social work degree from the Grant MacEwan University, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and worked in Edmonton as a Native liaison outreach worker, where she created and implemented a Native outreach program addressing emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical components. She fulfilled her dream of having horses upon moving to Phoenix, Arizona in 2002, and has been an equine enthusiast since that time. Experiencing the profound healing of horses, Sarah developed a curriculum with the horses at Desert Awakenings, where she collaborates with them to assist in healing and transformation. She is culturally sensitive and focused on empowering each client to their individual needs and/or desires. Her passion in coaching is to assist people to remember who they are and to awaken their authentic selves to uncover their own answers. The hope is that whomever enters Desert Awakenings is met with love and acceptance and leaves feeling they have been heard and seen, whether attending a session, workshop, ceremony, or drum circle. Her mantra is "Together we will awaken." We are intrinsically connected, and what we do to another, we do to ourselves. And with that, I like to hand it off to Mona to provide our closing prayer.
Okay. Thank you. It's an honor, and I'm grateful to be asked to do this closing prayer, and grateful for everyone for coming together. And I always like to think about that that quote that's been credited to Chief Sitting Bull, and it's that we put our hearts, our minds together to make what life we want for our children. And and although our group was small, it's like from this group it's going to ripple out, and the people that will join on Monday will also become part of this circle. So go ahead and say a little prayer here. Thank you. You may join along with me, make your own prayer as well. Call upon you again, giving thanks to you here for all of your divine creations, the water, the air, the fire of the earth, all these things that give us our everyday life. Thankful to you for all of your divine creations, the animal life, the four-legged, the wind, the water life, and all of the unseen. I'm grateful to you again too here for our ancestors, the places that we stand here, the places that we are here at this time, at this moment, acknowledging the ancestors of our peoples that made that their home. They left something there that has created a place for us to be and to experience this beautiful life that you gave to us. And then also our nations that we each represent, our bloodlines, our ancestry that we come from, each one of us. Grateful to you for those teachings that have been passed down to us, the wisdom, the trust, and the love and compassion, the wisdom that we've been given as a foundation of a way to be as a good person, good human being. And we walk this road of life up to this point in time with a good thought, good intention, and doing the best that we can to uphold these teachings. And then at the same time, be open, our heart, mind, body, and our spirit to the gifts and teachings that you bring to us through our connections with others, other people of many walks of life, of many lived experiences, that we can come together and we can share and we can create this good relationship and have a good understanding among each other so that we could really experience this good relationship of sharing and caring for our home, our Mother Earth, for all of life, so that we might be able to see and continue on, and for us to provide a place that's going to be livable for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and all of the future generations that are yet to come. All of our sacred sites, all of the places that you showed to us are places of origin where our people first came into this world, and all of the instructions you gave to our ancestors so that they would show us the way. And so here we are today. We may not have it all in the way that they were shown, but we are making every effort to uphold it. And that's why we join together here today. And all of the other people that are doing this work, that are continuing to uphold those teachings, and in recognition of the divine creations, the songs, the dances, the prayers, the offerings, the sacred places that you've created, that we have this relationship with, that we know when we go to it, we feel it, your divine presence, and we feel fulfilled physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. We even have this sense of feeling healed. And that's what we want for our mother, the earth, through our efforts, through every little bit of things that we can do, or even to say, that might touch the heart, the mind, the spirit of others who have not yet recognized you as being our mother. Help them to recognize you that way. The ones that are in these positions of leadership and decision makers, lawmakers, policy makers. We present it to them. We will be presenting many, many times. We'll be knocking on their door, just like our Indigenous relatives, our elders did back on that day when they entered the United Nations. That this day, the world's Indigenous Peoples Day, comes from. So we continue to walk that path that they created. We're carrying it on. Give us strength, courage, will, the understanding that we need in order to fulfill that sacred responsibility that you gave to us, that was passed on to us through our elders, relatives, teachers. So I'm grateful to you again. Here are our holy medicines that we use, our sacred earth-based medicines that we use. You might bless it, watch over it, take care of it for us, protect it for us, so we can always continue to use it and have that good practice of honoring and respecting it, so that it could always be here for us to help us. Throughout the world, our indigenous people, we have these sacred earth-based medicines, and we want to continue to have them available to. But it's only through you and your blessing of it that we're going to have it. That's the way I've been told, that's the way I understand it. And so I call them you that way. All of our medicine people, our spiritual leaders, men and women, and the ones that are coming up behind us, our grandchildren, great grandchildren, future generations that are yet to come, the ones that we will not see. I say this prayer to you. If I left anything out, I ask that you could take care of it for me. And take care of each and every one of the people that have been come together here this evening. Watch over them, take care of them. Keep us and our relatives, our loved ones, all of our people safe from all danger, evil, and harm and sickness. That's my prayer. That's my wish. That's my hope. So you might do that and take care of things that I might not have expressed. And so I say this to you for all my relations. Escalate, 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 escalate. Thank you.
Thank you, Grandmother Mona. And our final closing, we will go ahead and end with the showing of Indigenous anatomy. This is a 10-minute video.